This fictional story explores a profound truth. The greatest acts of kindness, the ones that define us, often happen when no one is watching, with no promise of reward, and when logic tells us to walk away. The hum of fluorescent lights was the soundtrack to Imani Carter's life, a life measured in double shifts, aching feet, and the gnawing anxiety of an empty bank account. As the hospital clock ticked past midnight, a bone-weary exhaustion settled into her marrow. One by one, her co-workers rushed off to their own lives, their own families, their own warm beds. Imani was, as usual, the last to leave. She grabbed her worn bag from her locker, her stomach growling. The granola bar she'd had for dinner 8 hours ago was a distant memory. She pulled out her phone. A notification from her bank glowed with cold indifference. Your checking account is overdrawn. Another bill, another late fee to be pushed into the ever-growing category of later. For now, all she wanted was sleep. As she turned to leave, her gaze was drawn to the last room at the far end of the deserted hallway, room 307. The door was slightly ajar. Inside lay a man the staff had labeled John Doe. He had been found unconscious in a public park 2 weeks ago, with no wallet, no identification, and no one who had come looking for him. He was a ghost in a hospital bed, a name without a story. Just hours earlier, she'd overheard her co-worker Brenda discussing him. "What's the point of getting attached?" Brenda had said, snapping her gum. "No family, no insurance. He's just blocking a bed. Management is already talking about moving him to a state facility." But as Imani stood there, she didn't see a bed blocker. Through the crack in the door, she saw a still figure whose entire existence had been reduced to a medical chart. She saw a man who was utterly alone. Her body screamed for rest, and her mind churned with financial worry. Self-preservation told her to go home, but her heart pulled her in the opposite direction, toward room 307. With a sigh of resignation and resolve, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. The air smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. Imani moved closer, her soft-soled shoes making no sound. Looking at the older man's face, etched with the lines of a life she couldn't imagine, she felt a profound connection. This wasn't a task to be completed. This was a person, deserving of dignity and presence. She pulled the vinyl visitor's chair closer and took his cool, limp hand in hers. It felt as fragile as a bird's wing. "Hello," she whispered. Calling him John Doe felt too impersonal. "Hello, Mr. Smith. My name is Imani. I'm one of the nurses here. I was just finishing my shift and I thought you could use some company." She didn't know it then. She couldn't have known that this small choice, the choice to see a man when everyone else saw a burden, was the first domino in a chain of events that was about to change everything, not just for him but for her, forever. In the weeks that followed, Imani's life fell into a new secret rhythm, long shifts, hurried visits to her mother's house to manage her care, and finally, her clandestine visits to room 307. Those minutes spent in the quiet company of the silent man became the most grounding part of her day. She filled the silence with her voice, confiding in his still form like a diary. She spoke of her deepest dream, to one day open a free clinic in her underserved neighborhood, a place where people could receive care with dignity. She confessed her fears about her mother's deteriorating health and the mountain of medical bills. She began to read to him from her own worn collection of poetry, reciting the verses of Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou. She treated him not as a patient, but as a person. She would gently wipe his brow with a cool cloth, humming old gospel hymns. One afternoon, she plucked a single yellow rose from the hospital garden and brought it to his room in a water cup. "A little sunshine for you," she smiled, placing it on his bedside table. The vibrant splash of color made the sterile room feel for a moment like a place of hope. Her dedication became a topic of gossip at the nurses' station. "I just don't get why you're wasting your time on that John Doe," Brenda said one evening, cornering Imani. Her tone was a mix of pity and accusation. "He's a lost cause, Imani. You're going to burn yourself out for someone who doesn't even know you're there. You have enough problems of your own." "He's a person, Brenda," Imani replied calmly, her gaze unwavering, "and everyone deserves to be treated like one." But her simple answer didn't stop the whispers that followed her down the hall. She chose to ignore them, building a wall of determination around her nightly ritual. 1 week after paying for her mother's medication, Imani had only a few dollars left. Her stomach ached with hunger. As she walked past a department store, she saw a display of soft fleece blankets in the window. Her mind went to Mr. Smith, covered only by the thin hospital-issue blanket. For a long moment she stood there, torn between her own hunger and his comfort. The choice was easy. She spent her last few dollars on a warm, navy blue fleece blanket. Later, riding the bus home with an empty stomach, she felt a profound peace. In the quiet of room 307, she gently unfolded the blanket and spread it over him. "There," she whispered, "this should be much warmer." As she pulled her hand away, she saw it. The index finger on his right hand twitched just once. Her heart leapt. It felt intentional, responsive. She raced to the nurse's station to report it, but the on-call resident smiled a patronizing smile. "It's just involuntary muscle spasms, nurse," he said dismissively. "It's common in these cases. Don't get your hopes up." But Imani knew what she had seen. It wasn't false hope, it was a signal. And she was right. Inside, Arthur Sterling was wide awake. Trapped by a rare neurological condition known as locked-in syndrome, he was fully conscious, a silent observer of his own oblivion. His predicament had begun as a cruel twist of fate, but he quickly turned it into a personal experiment. A reclusive, cynical billionaire, he wanted to see if selfless kindness still existed. For weeks, the staff's indifference and careless words had confirmed his darkest views of human nature. They saw a problem, not a person. But then there was Imani. Her voice was the first thing that had cut through the darkness. She wasn't just performing a duty, she was offering a connection. He heard her dreams and fears. He felt the gentle touch of her hand, smelled the fragrance of the single yellow rose, and felt the impossible warmth of the fleece blanket. He, a man who could buy anything, knew she had bought that blanket with money she desperately needed for herself. Her kindness was a lifeline, a steady light in his silent prison. He couldn't respond, but he listened, and he knew she was the real thing. Nearly 2 months passed. Imani's friendship with her silent patient became a cornerstone of her life. Outside room 307 was stress and bills, but inside was a profound peace. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as she was telling a story, it happened. A dry, raspy sound emerged from the man in the bed. "What? Imani froze, her heart pounding. His eyes were open and they were focused on her. Not vacant, but aware. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she fumbled for the cup on his bedside table. "You're back," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion as she held the straw to his lips. "Oh my goodness, you're back." News of John Doe's awakening sent a shockwave through the hospital. Doctors who'd dismissed him as a hopeless case now crowded his room, calling his recovery miraculous. But he claimed his memory was a fog. He couldn't remember his name or how he ended up in the park. Brenda was uncharacteristically quiet, her cynicism replaced by baffled disbelief. Mr. Smith's recovery was slow but steady, and he and Imani forged a genuine friendship. He was charming, with a quiet, wry sense of humor. He would deflect questions about his past, turning the conversation back to her. "Enough about this old man," he'd say with a twinkle in his eye. "Tell me, Imani, how is your mother?" He listened with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in the world. Then one morning, Imani arrived to see a note on the patient board. "John Doe, discharged to Northgate State Facility, 10 a.m. Her heart sank. Northgate was a long-term care facility hours away, a place known for being underfunded and understaffed. She rushed to his room and found him sitting on the edge of the bed in a generic grey sweatsuit that swallowed his frail frame. He looked small and vulnerable. "They're sending you away," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He nodded slowly. "It seems so, my friend." "It's not right," she insisted. "You're still recovering. You need people who care about you." "You cared," he said softly, his voice full of meaning. That was more than enough. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird into his hands. Inside she had scribbled a note. "Mr. Smith, never lose hope. You are a person of value and worth. Your friend, Imani. So you have something to read, she managed. Don't you ever lose hope. Do you hear me? He clutched the book to his chest. An orderly appeared at the door with a wheelchair. Time to go, the orderly said briskly. Imani watched, her heart breaking, as he was wheeled away. He didn't look back. That evening, Brenda found her staring into the empty room. See, Brenda said with a weary sigh. This is why we don't get attached, Imani. They always leave. And you're the one left hurting. For the first time, Imani wondered if she was right. The weeks that followed were hollow. Room 307 had a new occupant, but Imani couldn't walk past it without a pang of loss. She threw herself into her work, taking extra shifts to outrun the worry for Mr. Smith and the echo of Brenda's words. Had her kindness been a foolish waste of emotion? A month later, a sleek black limousine pulled up to the hospital entrance. Whispers followed as a man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out. Imani recognized him. He had posed as a social worker and processed Mr. Smith's discharge. He walked to the reception desk. "I'm looking for Nurse Imani Carter," he announced. When Imani was summoned, she approached him with nervous dread. The man, Mr. Harrison, gave her a respectful smile. "Someone would very much like to see you," he said, gesturing toward the limousine. Heart pounding with confusion, she followed him outside to the car. Mr. Harrison opened the back door. Inside sat Mr. Smith. But he was utterly transformed. Gone was the frail patient. In his place sat a man radiating power and health, dressed in a bespoke suit that cost more than her car. He looked distinguished and impossibly wealthy. He smiled, the same warm smile she knew. "Hello, Imani," he said, his voice rich and strong. "Mr. Smith," she breathed, struggling to reconcile the two images. He chuckled. "Not quite. My name is Arthur Sterling." The name hung in the air, rearranging her reality. The Arthur Sterling? The mythical, reclusive billionaire who had vanished from public life years ago? "I believe I owe you an explanation," he said gently. "My situation at the hospital was not entirely what it seemed. A sudden neurological event left me locked in my own body, but I remained conscious. After a lifetime of being surrounded by people who wanted something from me, I decided to use the circumstance as an experiment. I wanted to know if selfless kindness still existed in a transactional world." His voice softened. "For weeks the staff ignored me, confirming my worst fears about humanity. And then there was you. You walked into my room when you were exhausted and hungry. You spoke to me. You read me poetry. You brought me a rose and covered me with a blanket you bought with money I now know you couldn't spare. You never asked for a single thing in return. I heard every single word, Imani, every story, every fear, every dream. I hated leaving that way," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But I had to maintain the charade until I was fully recovered and could put my affairs in order. The book you gave me, I've read it 3 times. The note you wrote inside. I will keep it for the rest of my life." Arthur reached across the seat and took her hand. "You told me your dream, Imani, a clinic for your community. You didn't act with the hope of a reward, and that is precisely why you deserve one. I don't want to just give you a check. I want to be your partner." This morning, my lawyers finalized the paperwork to establish the Imani Carter Wellness Foundation. Imani felt the air leave her lungs. She couldn't speak. "The foundation has an initial fund of $200 million, Arthur said calmly. "Its first project will be to build a state-of-the-art health clinic in your neighborhood. You, Nurse Imani Carter, will be its executive director, with a salary that reflects your position. We have also paid off your mother's medical bills and your personal debts. Your days of struggling are over, Imani. It's time to build." I don't know what to say," Imani finally managed, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You don't have to say anything," Arthur replied softly, his grip firm and reassuring. "You already said it all night after night in room 307. You reminded a very cynical old man where true value lies, not in stock portfolios, but in here." He gently tapped his chest. "You saved more than my life, Imani. You saved my faith in humanity." News that John Doe was Arthur Sterling ripped through St. Jude's Hospital like a wildfire. At the nurses' station, Brenda stared at her phone, her jaw slack with shock while reading about the new foundation. She watched as Imani walked back into the hospital later that day to gather her things. The exhaustion was gone from Imani's face, replaced by a radiant glow of purpose. It just goes to show you never truly know who you're being kind to, but if you're doing it right, that's the whole point. True kindness isn't transactional. It's not about what you might get back. It's about giving a piece of yourself freely, with no strings attached. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that a little kindness, even in the darkest of rooms, can change the world.